that we're able to record these sessions. All of our speakers have agreed to that, and they've been generous enough with their time and allowing us to record the session so that we can share it with the other people who weren't able to join. I received quite a few emails earlier today and last evening about people not being able to join. So we have a number of people on with us today, so I'm happy about that. And again, for a second time, we have Isaac Murdoch joining us today to share some of his knowledge. And maybe Isaac, I'll have you introduce yourself and just a brief recap for those people who may not have been on the call with us on last Thursday. And as before, if you have your cameras on, I don't think anybody does, you can shut those off. And if you have any questions, please feel free to post those in the comment section and I will get to them. I do have some that people have already shared with me, so I will be posing those to Isaac as we get going. So I'll turn that over to you, Isaac.
Well, thank you very much. First off, can everybody hear me okay and see me okay?
I can see you okay. Yep.
And my audio is good?
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yep, I can see you fine too.
Okay, yeah, great. Well, my name is Isaac Murdoch. I'm from Serpent River First Nation, which is located on the north shore of Lake Huron. Manzanap kinagay go anabe, bamgija kandishnakaz, kanabe gukchabigaj watan donjaba, gigo gnoje and do dem. So I am from the Fish Clan. I come from a village that's called where the serpents are painted on the rocks. Simply because there is serpents painted on the rocks at the old village site. And my name, Bom Gijik, it means revolving sky. That was my great-grandfather's name. I'm Ojibwe. And I come from Anishinaabe, which is our traditional hunting territory north of Elliott Lake. And it's an honor to be here. A lot of people will ask me, like, what do you do? And I don't even know what I do. I do a little bit of art. I do a little bit of music. I do some storytelling. I involve myself in conversations about all sorts of stuff. I'm an author. I have a book out. I'm working on my second book. So I'm always busy doing something, creating stuff. I do a lot of work with schools. I've done thousands of talks with school kids, across North America. I've traveled the world. I've been very blessed and very humbled by the awesome experiences that have been put in my path as an artist and storyteller. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, I consider ourselves very fortunate to have you, Isaac, because I know how busy you are, and I really appreciate that. We can meet in this way, and it's I think fitting that you were talking about your work with storytelling and art, because last week we kind of touched on those things, and we thought, well, let's circle back to that on Tuesday and talk a little bit about it. And we have a couple of questions here around art. I'll put the first one to you, and it says, "Hi, Isaac. I saw some of your beautiful artwork online, and I'm wondering if you could talk about what that part of your work means to you and what the creative process it involves for you."
Well, that's a really good question. So I think for me, art is a release. It's a way to get feelings inside of me out. It's a way to convey a message that I want to get out that maybe I can't say with words. And so art is really an outlet for me. And it's a way for me to communicate with the outside world. When I was younger, we had it pretty tough. And so art became an outlet. It became a way to get the frustrations out. It became a way for me to get some of that stuff out that I experienced as a child. And it became almost like therapy in a way. And so I create all these images with hearts and and all these different creatures and stuff like that. And it was just a way for me to try to showcase the land and the magic that's there. But it was also a way for me to heal, and a way for me to convey healing messages out to the world. Very good question. Yeah, very good.
So when it comes to the creative part of it, you're going more on your feeling and basing those on experiences that you've had. Would that be
Yeah,
fair?
that would be fair. So like you kind of get into a groove of something, and you start to create, and you don't know where you're going with it, but you're just completely absorbed into it. Like nothing in the outside world exists at that point. And it's usually I'm in solitude. It's usually at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's just like I'm on this thing, and I just got to do it. And like sometimes I'll wake up out of a deep sleep, out of a dream, and I'll start doodling this thing. And it's just the artists are weird. They're weird. They don't run by formula. They kind of run on spirit and emotion, and they can't even really explain what they do and why they do it. Artists are weird like that. So that's pretty much the best answer I can give. And most artists will say the same thing. It's just in them,
No,
and it comes out.
yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. And just the other night, I had a similar experience in that something just came to me and I had to write it down. So that's why I always keep a piece of paper and a pen beside my bed so that I can write those things down. Because inevitably, as I'm getting older, I can't remember everything all the time. So I think it's a good practice to have. One of the other questions that came out was, a lot of people are talking about the TRC and the work, and a lot of artists are doing work around the TRC. The question was, what do you think are two other themes that should be considered for students in the grade? There's a grade 9 art course that focuses on Indigenous artists. And, I guess the question was, what are a couple of other themes that you think should be explored in that particular class? And, are there themes and maybe even projects? Sometimes with themes, people can take on a whole bunch of different ideas of how to express that, but maybe sometimes people want to work on one specific project. What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I think when we look at the Truth and Reconciliation project that was so influential in moving Indigenous issues forward. There's a lot of course, things to pick from and to choose from. But one of the most important things that's never, ever on the table is land. And so we know as Anishinaabeg people, like where I come from, our land was stolen. And so the Crown never got consent to have a title over our lands. And the provinces never got consent. Canada never got consent. So we keep asking ourselves, how did these governments get jurisdiction over our lands when we have treaties? And the treaties was in our area was to share the land, and that we were to follow the natural laws of Creator, or the natural laws of the land as we coexisted on it, and that we were to have our own life. And so there's a forced jurisdiction that plays out in mapping. And so when you look at maps, you don't really see where we fit in. So we've been systematically erased from the maps. And so our place names, our territories, our agreements, our treaties, even amongst each other, have all been systematically erased, so that these other governments can come in with the mandate of resource extraction. So they look at the land as resources, And we look at the land as our healthcare system, as our sustainable, very sustainable economies. We look at the land in terms of being spirit. And so land is the one issue that needs to be highlighted. And it's the one that government keeps avoiding. But, we have to keep creating art. We have to keep including it into conversations. And we have to start bringing it up. And it's, it took about 100 years of educating Canadians that the land is Canada. And so it's going to take us a while for us to understand and relearn that these are Indigenous lands. And that when Canada was created, we were not at the table. When Ontario was created, we were not at the table. During the Treaty of Ghent in 1814, when the British and the Americans defined the boundaries of Canada and the United States, we were not at the table. And so for many Indigenous people, the boundaries are illegitimate, meaning that they're not recognized by many First Nations people, and that we have land issues that we have to discuss. And that just because this happened a long time ago, it doesn't mean that it doesn't impact things today, because it really does. Because our territories run down into the States. The Anishinaabeg, we have Anishinaabeg in Alberta, in BC, we have them in Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, we have them in Wisconsin, we have them in Michigan, North Dakota, we have them in, pretty much everywhere. And so, we have to look at the mapping systems that include Indigenous people. And same with the Haudenosaunee. They definitely have territories that range, down at the States as well. And we all know the border issues are complicated and they're dumb. And but these are the things that we need to address, and we need to start re-educating the truth about lands, how they were stolen, and how we were forced off of our lands onto reservations, so that they could control us and force us into colonization. And so that's something that we can all work on together to try to undo the wrongs of the past that need to be corrected.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And it's such an important and integral part of who we are as, whether we're Anishinaabe, Ongwahumwe, I think it's hugely important. And I saw someone's, everyone has this little icon or whatever by their name. And I saw one of the people on the call with us. It looks to me like a heart, the shape of a heart, a human heart, but out of it is growing flowers and stuff. And I thought, how ironic that you're talking about the land. And, this image pops up of a heart with the flowers and whatnot coming out of it, because that is land is so important. It is the heart of everything, right? So it's that's really good. And it made me think of, what we do. We call it the Ohanagadabadekwa. And, that's foundational to all of Haudenosaunee, because it goes through all of creation, and it's what we give thanks for every day. So it's an incredibly important part that, I think artists and art teachers and art students could explore. And there's all kinds of different ways, from a contemporary lens, from a traditional lens, that they would all, I think, play a part. So that's really good. One of the other questions, Isaac, that comes up is they talk about, some people talk about appropriation, right? And with art, do you have any concerns about, cultural appropriation when it comes to art and whatnot?
That's a good question. First off, how old are the students here today?
We have anywhere from 14 to 18, and then of course adults. Okay,
great. So yeah, I just thought for some reason I thought that they might be 9 years old, and I was like, oh no, I'm going too deep.
No, you're good.
Okay. So I do have some ideas about art appropriation. I think that when you look at art, historically through the lens of my people, art was very ceremonial. And so when you look at the spiritual part of who we are historically, you're always looking at our art. So you're looking at our weaved baskets, our mats, you're looking at our sacred pipes, you're looking at our birch bark scrolls, you're looking at the pictographs or the rock carvings on the rocks, you're looking at different beading patterns, and it's all very spiritual. And so there's a fine line between ceremony and art. And so for the Anishinaabe, historically, there was no difference between the two. It was one and the same. Art was ceremony. And so today, in a contemporary world, things are different. So a long time ago, if there was a pictograph that was made to tell a story, and if somebody else made the same sort of pictograph to tell the story, that was very common. And so I remember seeing a pictograph of a man, a moose, and a wolf in northern Saskatchewan. And that was the story of when Wasakichak fought the serpents during a flood with his brother the wolf. And and how the wolf gave the people fire and had the power of fire. And in the Great Lakes, there was a picture, the exact same pictograph of a man, a wolf, and a moose. And it was basically that it had the same story. It was a story of how Nana Buju got fought the serpents and, got the power of fire and gave it to the people. And so virtually thousands of miles away from each other, you had the same image that was conveying the same story. The pictographs themselves were a little bit different, but clearly it was a moose, human, and wolf. And so with pictography, you'll always see the picture with the man with his arms up, or the woman, and the arms going down. You'll see thousands of images that are the same, because it was part of our writing system. And so there in the Ojibwe way of life, we have many different types of communication. There is communication of the mind, where they can communicate with each other just using their mind. And I was able to do that with my father. I could communicate with him with my own mind. And he would send me a message in my mind, and I would get it, or I'd send him a message, and he would get it, and then he would call me, or I'd call him. There is also communicating with our mouth. And they say that the words come from our heart, they come out of our mouth, and they go into somebody else's mouth, and they go down into their heart. That's why you always see a line from heart to heart in art. And then there's sign language. So sign language was a very common way to communicate, but also through pictography, which there were a couple of different kinds. So you had the main writing system that most native tribes could understand and read. And it was just like sign language. And a lot of the figures were based on sign language too, or vice versa. And so there was a common writing system of pictography that was used during trading, using through negotiations, so that people would be able to communicate, because the languages sometimes were so different. But then there was pictography on the rocks, and the rock carvings were that some people called dream writing. And so these images came from dreams or vision quests, and they don't have a formula or something that everybody could read, but there is a lot of commonality in the symbols. So for example, if your arms are pointing up, you receive something from up there. If your arms are pointing down, you receive something from down there. If you're carrying an animal, that meant that you had a medicine bag. If you, for example, if there was a spiral, that could mean a doorway into something. It could mean, the moon might hit that spot at a certain time of year. So with pictography and with the old style of art, there was no such thing as appropriation. and people respected the symbols, and they respected them, and they believed that those symbols had a spirit, and that those spirits were for the people. And so back in the day, there was no such thing as art appropriation. People did what they did, and if if you use these symbols, and if they turned out very similar to somebody else's, then that was okay. Today, art appropriation is a big issue, and the question is it right or is it wrong? And so with my art, so for example, here's a doodle I made right here, and it's my art, and I give full permission for people to use my art to fundraise for issues, as long as it's grassroots and like t-shirt companies aren't taking it. I give full authority for people to use my art, copy my art, use it in the classrooms, alter it, change it, whatever. I give full authority for people to use my art. Other artists, on the other hand, do not. They will copyright their art or their style. They feel that it's theirs, and that you need to ask permission. And so, I believe that it's important to ask permission, because not everybody has the same viewpoint as myself. And so some people may say, yeah, go ahead. And others will be say like, sorry, but you can't, or I need to be there, or I need to be involved. And so I believe that because art is ceremony, and I still have that sort of belief in my value bag, I believe that permission should be asked. So if you're going to be using somebody's art, ask them. That's the right thing to do today, because it's not in the same context as how it was 150 years ago. It's different now. And so I think that it's the reason why it's important to ask too, is so that we can learn. So for example, if I was to learn about Chinese art, I would definitely reach out to the Chinese community, and I would ask, to learn more about it, out of respect to the art and to the symbolism that might be sacred to them. So hopefully that answers some of the question. It's a big thing.
No, it really is, because some people will talk about or compare art as, they'll say, is it appropriation or is it appreciation? When, I've seen grade 7 or 8 students copying Norval Morso and doing some of his work, as a project. So, people wonder, well, is that okay if we're kind of copying someone else's art because we're doing it because we appreciate it? So it's a very tricky one, for sure.
Right. Well, I know Norval Morso was a very fascinating figure, and of course really appreciated how art had healing powers, and how he felt that the colors had a vibration, that when sitting beside each other could actually heal people. And there's lots of people that felt that they were cured by his paintings, and so hundreds of people that were sick have got healed, and say the only reason why I got healed was because I stared at that picture 5 hours a day. And so I believe that art is healing too. So I think that there's more to art than we actually know or want or think sometimes. And so when we're dabbling with something sacred, I think that it should be stewarded by somebody that understands those things and knows those things. Again, art is ceremony for Indigenous people.
Yeah, and there was a comment that art is like therapy too, in medicine, and it's just as we were talking about Norval Morso, I remember doing a little bit of studying on him and learning that when he first started painting, because as you mentioned, a lot of his his paintings were stories. You know, he was telling stories, and a lot of people in the community, you know, the elders were not necessarily impressed that he was doing that he was sharing these stories, right? But
Right.
you know, art, as you said, art is like storytelling. So
Absolutely.
you know, and I know there's other questions about storytelling. So maybe you can talk about how the art is the storytelling, and go a little bit more into that.
Sure. You know, for us, we call stories atsukanan, and what that means is spirit words, I guess. And so we're conveying words, and we're talking about spirits. And so a lot of our stories, our sacred stories, our teachings, are called atsukanan, and they convey the original instructions that we got when we first arrived here on Earth. And so we believe we come from the stars, and we arrived here, and we were given certain instructions. And our stories kind of remind us, or always bring us back to those original instructions. And so, you know, stories are very sacred, but stories are also, they're also recorded through the pictographs, through the birch bark scrolls, through the tattooing, through the you know, the different forms of communication, through the beadwork. And so, you know, the stories were recorded down that way for generations so that we would never forget. And so that's why it's important to learn those different types of communication systems so that we will never truly forget what was passed down to us. And of course, those stories, we consider them medicine, and we consider them medicinal in many ways. And so sometimes when somebody's sick, we'll tell a healing story in hopes that the spirits that we talk about in that story will pity that sick person. And so stories and art, um, our language, it all has healing properties. And of course, the medicines, the plants. And so the stories are integral because that's how we pass down this sacred information from one generation to the next. And so the oral history is important, but also the artistic version of that story is critical as well. And so lots of times we cross reference between Ojibwe pictography and writing systems with the oral history, and they're quite accurate. So, you know, it's really important to do what we can to preserve our stories, our writing systems, and of course, our art. We got to keep making art. We got to keep telling these stories. Good question.
Yeah, that I thought that was really good. And it's ironic that you brought up tattooing because one of our students asked, how do you feel about the Prime Minister having a tattoo of First Nations art on him?
Well, I think, you know, he's got a Haida tattoo on him, and so that's between him and the Haida people. So I can't really say that it's right or wrong. That's between him and the Haida people, and I don't know enough about that history. So maybe he received consent, you know, from the Haida people. So I'm not too sure about it. I can't say that it's right or wrong, um, just because I don't know the history behind it. Um, and that's just what I think. I just simply don't know. But I think if a nation did consent for somebody to have a piece of their art tattooed on them, then that's between that nation and that person. So, for example, if you know, so for example, a lot of people ask me, "Can I get your art tattooed?" And I'm like, "Yeah, go for it. You know, give her." And so I consent because a lot of people want to have my images tattooed. So I've had hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, tattoo my images on their body, and I'm okay with that. And so, and some of them are non-native, and so I always look at people like this. You know, are they, you know, do they want to protect the earth? Um, you know, are they supportive of First Nations people? Um, you know, are they good people? You know, so I mean, generally, if people are good people and they want to help protect the earth, then I always say they're deserving to have one of my images tattooed on their bodies. But if it was like an oil industry guy, or like somebody like a general of an army or something, I'd probably say no. So I don't give people free range to tattoo my images on their body. With Justin Trudeau, I don't know the story behind it.
No, that's certainly fair enough, because that might have been an agreement that they made. So I think that was, I think that's really fair. I know last week, just thinking more about storytelling, last week you made reference to how the media is influencing stories. And I didn't know if you wanted to talk a little bit more about how the media is influencing stories and the narrative of First Nations people.
Well, I think media, plays an important role in society. I think that when you look at the history of our people, we survived, since the beginning, without social media, without the internet. And so I know that our stories and our language and all of those things, they seem to have thrived more so without it than with it. And we know that in the English language, our stories are not being conveyed properly, and that they're not coming out right, and that the true intent of some of the stories are not being produced accurately, because a lot of times media will present them in the English language. And so, so when we use media to convey stories, I believe that it does take away some aspect of the true meaning of it, because it's different than sitting around a fire, hearing the stories in the language. And so learning our language is really critical, and we need to put all of our efforts into that, because we're in a different time now. This is different. This isn't 1988 when, uh, in 1988 it was like, forget the languages, you go to school, you learn the white man way, and you become successful, and everything will be fine. That's what I was told. And so we know that things have changed, and a lot of our elders are saying that we made a mistake by not teaching the young people the language, and that we were essentially brainwashed from residential schools and society, and that there was this irrational belief that we had to be successful, and to involve ourselves in capitalism. And so, the English language kind of took a back, our original languages took a back seat, and English language was the one that everybody had to use. And there's a huge consequence to that. And also media is what's driving that. And so I think that I think books are good. I think that radio is good. I think that social media is good when it's used, but I love it more when the language is attached to it. And so whenever I am involved in a project or something like that involving media, I always include the language. It's like, we need to have language in here or it doesn't count. I think that media, I don't know. I think we could live without mainstream media. I really do. I think it was a mistake. I think it was a big mistake, because before we never had it, and before it was better. And so media can trick people. And I'm not one of those like conspiracy theorist guys, or I'm not like one of those paranoid people about media. But I think that we could live without it, and that we have our own style of media and communications amongst Indigenous people that we should try to bring back. It's more reliable. It can't crash on you.
Well, I guess the other piece to that too is that it tends to skew identity, right? I think that's another big part of it. And I know you talked a little bit about that on Friday or Thursday rather. So I didn't know if you wanted to touch on that, or the other piece that we were going to talk about or touch on today, was that little thing in Knocknagawin. And I jokingly say little because I know it's huge. And just before you do that, there is a question that was posed. How do you feel about non-Indigenous people learning and using Indigenous languages?
I personally think it's great. If I was to go to India and if I started learning their language, I think that would be the appropriate thing to do. Why would I impose a foreign language on them? I think that I would want to learn their language, and I'd want to, out of respect for them and their lands and their history, I would want to learn their language and talk to them in their language. That would be the honorable thing to do, the respectful thing to do. That would be, done in good form and good taste to do that. And so if I went to India or China, or if I went to, wherever, I would want to learn their language and talk to them in their language. And I think that they would appreciate it, and I think that would be the correct thing to do. So when non-native people want to learn the language, I'm like, cool, because that's the language that's here. And it's our languages are not recognized as official languages, and so it's just French and English in Canada, and we're underfunded. And so when non-native people go ahead and try to learn the language, I'm like, that's pretty cool. I respect that, and I do.
Well, I agree. And I like the fact that even you don't have to necessarily be even able to speak all of the language, but at least being able to say hello in someone's language, I think is kind of neat. And I had a roommate in university who's Inuk, and he taught me a few words. And when I meet other Inuit people, I know how to greet them, and it always brings a smile to their face, and they're oh, where did you learn that sort of thing? So just a simple greeting of saying hello, I think is a big step, right?
Yeah, I remember I was at a mechanic shop one time, and I walked in there and I said, "Ani, bonjour," and the lady looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, what did you say?" I said, "Hello, like how are you, Anishna?" And she goes, "I don't know why you're speaking native to me." And I said, "Well, I find it odd that you live in native land and you don't even know the very simple greeting of how to say hello." I find that really odd. And she looked at me and she says, "You know what? You're right. I find it odd that I don't know the greeting of the indigenous people that are here." She goes, "You're absolutely right. You're right and I'm wrong. It is very appropriate for you to greet me in your language because we're in your ancestral lands, and I should know this, and I'm embarrassed that I don't." And so it's just how you look at things. Keep promoting, keep promoting the language.
No, exactly. And like you said, just simple hello. And I know a lot of schools, some of the things that they're doing is they're creating banners to say hello or welcome or greetings in all kinds of different languages. So I think that's a really neat idea to have at schools, because we have a diverse cultural group that we can bring in. And of course, Indigenous languages are part of those too. So I think it's great. Just Isaac, just being cognizant of the time, it's 11:15, and in Knocknagawin is a big topic that maybe I don't know if you could talk about it for a little bit of time, just to give an overview. But I think it's an important message, and I know you've touched on it a little bit with what we've talked about so far, but. I just think it's an important message that people need to hear.
Yes, so we have our own they our old people always said that there's the laws that exist here, that these are not really Anishinaabeg laws, but they're laws of the land. They're the laws of the universe, of the sky, of the clouds, of the animals, of the plants, the waters, the underworld. And that there's a set of laws. And we call that Chinak Nagay Waninanin, which actually, if you break down the word, Chi means large. Nak Nagay Waninanin, it means Nak K. It means the earth. Nak Nagay Wanin, it means coming up. And Win means the way of life. So it means this is the laws of the earth. That's what the word actually translates to, is the laws of the earth. And so when we look at Chinak Nagay Wanananin, what we're looking at is a system that was already here before we came here. And so for many Indigenous people, we believe that we come from the stars and we were lowered down here, and that we're just guests here. And as guests, we've been instructed to follow Chinak Nagay Wanananin, and that as guests, we're to respect those great laws that are here. The animals follow them, the plants follow them, the sun follows this law, the moon, the fish, everything else follows this law, this natural law that exists here. And as humans, we're also expected to follow this law as well. Because of colonization, because of the globalization of Western education, because of a different way of life that has transformed, our original laws and instructions have been broken down, and we're just trying to find our way back to that. And so I think it's really important for educators and teachers and parents and students to really try to understand what those natural laws are. Those natural laws are not just for Native people. Every culture has them. Every culture has a set of principles on how to live with the earth. And so whether you're Mohawk or Oneida, or whether you're Seneca, whether you're Chinese, whether you're, for whatever, you're German, you're Scottish, you're Irish, when you look back deep enough into a person's history and culture, you will find Chinak Nagay Wanananin. It might be called something different, but it's there. And that's something that humanity has to try to find again. And we have to invite those principles and those laws to be a part of our family. We have to invite those into our homes and to live with us, so that we can understand and learn how to live on this earth. So it's critical for our survival that we understand the laws of the earth. And so Chinak Nagay Wanananin, the sacred laws, there's many, and it's hard to, it takes a lifetime to understand, but as humans, we're told that that's what our purpose is to learn from this earth. And so there's many teachings to be had about Chinak Nagay Wanananin. And I hope that we do our best to break away from colonial systems that steer us away from those natural laws, and that we start going into those natural laws and learning about them and understanding them. And that's through our languages, and that's through land-based education. And so as long as we're in the classroom all the time, then we're not really understanding Chinak Nagay Wanananin. It's being on the land, it's planting, it's getting our hands dirty, it's understanding the moon and the stars, the weather, it's understanding the different migration patterns of plants and animals. That's really important, because that's how we base our sustainable economies on. And so Chinak Nagay Wanananin was put in place so that we could always live here and leave it the same way we found it. And so our sustainability depends on understanding those natural laws. Our survival depends on those natural laws. Big question. Deep question. Deep.
Well, we've talked about it before, and I've heard you speak to students about it before, and I just think it's such a strong and important message for us to remember, right? It's and as someone once said, we're borrowing the earth from our grandchildren, right? So I think it's something that a lot of young people are already aware of, right? Today, there, as you said last Thursday, it's the young people who are going to be picking things up and moving forward and leading, and we need to listen to that. So I don't. If you wanted, I think we need to wrap up here, but I wanted to thank you, but I also wanted to give you an opportunity to share any final thoughts, Isaac.
Well, I just want to thank all of you for having me with you today. It's always an honor and a pleasure. I always feel blessed and very humbled to be able to speak. Be safe and, be good to each other, be kind. And when we're kind and when we're giving and when we're good to each other, that's what promotes life and that's what keeps us safe. And so, keep up with the social distancing, keep up with staying home. The COVID's going to pass. It might spike up again. Be careful and, have each other's back, and lift your people up, and just be good to everything, and things will be okay. Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure and honor.
Oh, now Nyalgoa, Isaac Chimigwech, for your time. It's an honor for us, honestly, to have you be a part of this. And I'm going to touch base with some other folks to see if we can get you back. And but I just wanted to take the time to thank you for everything, all the sharing, and I sent you my virtual tobacco. So so take care, and we'll talk to you soon. Bamapi.
Bamapi guab min minwa nahaw. Gimig wit pagom nahaw.
Take care.
Thank you.